Thought That Get Results. I'm Everett Weber Herbert, and as per usual, we're here every Tuesday evening with something that at least we think is of community interest and or of some concern. And if you think that you have something which fits into that category, you'd like to find out how you can be a part of the program, well, why don't you drop us a line, address it to Let's Talk program in care of Vaughan Radio, P.O. Box 195, Charlestown in Nevis, or give us a call. Our numbers are 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. And by the way, those will be the numbers that you'll use to be a part of this evening's discussion. Again, thank you all very much for joining us. This is your voice in the community, Thought That Get Results. With regard to your participation in the show, we encourage you to call in on the numbers listed, 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. Here's a suggestion. You have a question or a comment, perhaps you can get a pencil, piece of paper, write it down so that when you're getting on the show, you're well organized and you take as little time as you can so that we can accommodate as many of you as we can. We ask only, first of all, you respect others, yourself, and then respect others, because we will not accept anything we deem not within our broadcast standards. Thank you all again for joining us. This is your voice in the community, Thought That Get Results. Tonight, Dr. Patricia Bartlett, good evening.
Good evening, Rebo, and thanks for the invitation to join you and your guests tonight. I would like to say a special good evening to Mr. Brand. He's not here. I realize he's not here tonight, and wherever he is, I hope that he's doing well. He's not under the weather. To my friends in St. Thomas, you know who you are, but I'll still name you. And Pam, Mr. Martin. Of course, I have other friends there. But these people, for some reason, they're kind of special. Maybe it's just because they told me that I'd like to hear him on the radio. Who knows? Webo, I like your shirt. I like your shirt, Webo. And I hope everybody get a chance tonight to tune in and watch you. I like your, I like your shirt a lot. To my husband right there, I know he's tuned in, if he did not off. Good evening. And to the other people in England, I know you really make a sacrifice as it relates to your sleep. And we appreciate very much. And the people, of course, in the US and all over the globe, we'd just like to wish you a good evening.
Ted Hobson, good evening.
Good evening, Weber, and good evening to my fellow panelists. And of course, I'm always very honored to be asked to take part in this program, Tuesday after Tuesday. I want to wish all the people who are listening throughout the world, because we have division petitions scattered all over the world, and I am amazed how many of them tune into this program. And before I finish my introductory remarks, I want to pass on an apology of Mr. Honorable Spencer Brand, who was called to duty just before he was supposed to pick me up to bring me here, but of course he commissioned his son to bring me here. So I want to apologize again for him not being here, because he would really like to be here tonight. Well, and I'm expecting a very good discussion tonight. Last night, I think there was a very good town hall meeting. I understand Mr. Stanley was very much part of that meeting, and I expect him to report tonight on the happenings at that meeting. Good night, Webo.
Edric W. Stanley, good evening.
Good evening, Webo. Good evening to you, fellow panelists. Good evening to the people of St. Kitts and the gracious people of Nevis and those who are listening to us on the World Wide Web and throughout the Caribbean Basin. Of course, I am still partially under the weather and thus lack a certain degree of firepower. But, however, I'll attempt to drum up some, muster some, and hence make the show interesting. But I must say, Webo, and I must begin to pull back on some of the personal things you and I would get into, because seemingly, I might get myself into trouble with regard to my trying to be forthright upon your requests and thus even call people's names, but to prove the point and also to prove you're wrong. So sometimes if you bring that to the fore and you would find stunned silence, deafening silence, then it's because I have decided to travel another avenue and take a little tack or turn with reference to some of the things that you and I get into. Of course, these things do make the show rather interesting, because there are many people who would meet me and they would say, boy, you know, I'd just like to hear you on Weibo, going back and forth. But like I said, that's part of our show over the past 30 years. When I would begin to pull back with reference to certain reasons, I wouldn't delve into them at this juncture. Good evening again, Weibo.
Conrad Nye Libert, good evening.
Good evening, Weibo, and a pleasant good evening to your staff here at Vaughan Radio, to my colleagues around the table, a pleasant good evening, and to all in tune to this wonderful program, a pleasant good evening. Welcome to this program, Weibo. Once again, we gather to discuss the issues affecting the people. I'm always happy to be a part of that. I must say, this week newspaper, I'm not sure which one, I realize that we are to look forward to a dialysis machine at the hospital, which is great. And also we had some commentary from the Premier on the matter of the airport, and I thought that was really good. And I think that in particular was his speech, I suppose, brought some clarity to the airport scandal and situation. Weibo, I'm happy to be here again. I must comment on the beautiful weather we are having here as opposed to what I'm hearing in North America. And so once again, I'm inviting everyone over. And, you know, I like to see black tourists as well. And you know, so you guys can come over and enjoy this weather. But one thing of concern, Weibo, just recently at evenings, there's no water coming through the pipe. I'm not saying that there's a water shortage. Maybe it's because of the plumbing and the works being done on the road. And, of course, a lot of these major pipes has been dug up. So just one little concern about that. Otherwise, Weibo, I'm sitting on the back seat of my mind and I'm ready to engage in any conversation.
Wonderful. Back seat of my mind.
We'll be having this evening, Weibo. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Edric, because Ted says that Edric is going to report on something. You're not ready to report? Okay, I just wanted to mention something I saw in the news earlier, and perhaps if anybody would like make a comment on it, because there's certain things I find of interest, and I look on it not only in a global context, but in our own context to see how it fits. There was a news item this evening in the international news where this American teenager, a female, left to join ISIS, found herself with 3 children during the process. 2 were killed, now has 1, now is repentant and wants to go back home to the United States. So they interviewed her, and now she's talking about, she realized that she made mistakes and so on and so forth, right? A number of them did, you know. I think even some persons from Trinidad went as well. And the interviewer asked her, well, do you think that you should be punished for what you did? Because I'm sure that the Constitution, the United States, and others speak to acts like those. In some instances, they call it treason. You can't join another country to fight against your country, you know. Anyway, the answer was very interesting. Keep in mind this person is young, maybe about 19 years of age. Made the decision, but now says either she shouldn't be punished, or if she is punished, the punishment should be to allow her to now speak out against ISIS and warn people about going. So I just thought it was interesting. Edric, what do you think?
Well, I think the person was from Britain.
Britain.
Rather than
Okay,
United States.
right, yes.
And when I heard of those 2 young ladies making such gigantic effort to reach Syria to join ISIS, I said, they got to be crazy. But of course, when this lady now recognizes the punishment that would be coming down the pike, it is quite plausible for her to come up with such a recommendation. Because obviously she would get an enormous amount of publicity, and in addition, she can talk against ISIS and maybe be rewarded by Great Britain for having to report on ISIS's secrets. So I think she's quite clever. Can let me repeat. I think she's quite clever to have thought of such an idea that she shouldn't be punished. And let me tell you about ISIS as to why young people should not attempt to join the forces of ISIS. Because, again, these are barbaric people in my view, and in that regard, no civilized country should allow its citizenry or citizens to join such groups and no warning to come back without severe punishment. I can't tell you what the punishment I would recommend, but at the same time, they should be punished simply because the consequences toward their country, in my view, are grave.
Ted, what do you think? You were a magistrate at one point. What if that case were before you?
I remember when these three young ladies, they were all 15 at the time, when they left their parents' home. In fact, they were supposed to be at school, and all three of them manufactured some reason. I don't know how they were financed, but they end up getting into Syria to join ISIS, and one of them has been killed. One was killed, and the other two are in wretched conditions. They all got married very early. Of course, the fighters were given their prizes and so forth, so they get the young ones, and now, of course, as you indicated, she lost two of her kids already. And now she has a little one. I don't know whether she's just pregnant or she has a little one, but so she's trying to dictate, and I think her suggestion may be attractive because I think you have an example of somebody very young went off, and according to her, she's now disillusioned. In fact, in an interview I heard her mention that she actually saw beheading and all of that sort of thing. And at the time when she said that she didn't feel bad because she understood they were infidel, that sort of thing. But progressively, as she gives further interviews, she's coming around to the situation where she has to show contrition. She has to show she's sorry. So now she's saying she's sorry, and of course she's come up with this brilliant idea that if you're going to punish me, give me a platform to tell people how bad it is. I think what will operate in her favor is the fact that she was only 15 at the time, and our Western civilization has always give diffidence to people of that sort of age and youth exuberance and so forth, because nobody could have understood at the time why these three little girls go off, say they're going to join ISIS and all of that sort of thing. So we all make mistakes when we are young. Of course, their mistake has turned out to be tragic, and not only for themselves, but for their parents, because their parents were absolutely devastated when they left, and still are. The parents who want her back and so forth. She's born in England, and so she's entitled to citizenship and the rights of citizenship. So I think sooner or later she'll get back to Britain. The question is whether she's so indoctrinated that she could be a danger to society, and that is the real issue that not only the British people face, but all those Europeans, because a lot of Europeans who went off to fight for ISIS, and as you mentioned, quite a few Trinidadians actually went, and some of them were killed, and some of them are still around, and I suppose they will want to come back home too. But one has to be very concerned, because it's all right for a 16-year-old, 15-year-old girl and all of that, but you bring back these hardened people into society. You never know what they'll do down the road. So it's a real, especially for us in the Caribbean with those that went to Trinidad, it's going to be a very big concern for the government of Trinidad. Sooner or later when these people turn up at their doorsteps. I think they'd rather that they stay where they are and be eliminated, but who knows? Because, you know, the parents still want these people back. They're parents, after all. They're their children. So they're going to bring pressure on the Trinidadian government and all of that. But I don't know how it works. But it's a clever idea she has come up with.
Well, so that's the details of the judgment. What does the last two lines say? Because remember when I came to you, I said, based on the fact that you were a magistrate.
Yeah.
And based on, notwithstanding you don't have all of the facts, but just generally speaking, I heard you. What would be the last two lines of what you just said say?
Well, I think they has to get a measure of punishment, and of course they have to be monitored as well, you know.
Oh,
so
okay.
You know, you can't expect to commit offenses, and no matter how young you are, and not suffer some consequence, really.
Okay, but see, that's very important for you to say, so that, because notice that I said I was looking at it in the context and see how we can learn from it as well. So in my view, it is important so that when our young people are listening, and you were to say, well, sure, it's clever, so set them free, they don't get the impression that maybe they can go ahead and do that and come up with a very clever
No, there are
idea of
consequences,
punishment.
Babo. There are consequences, no matter how young you are.
Okay. Naya?
Well, interestingly, I think the young lady or the young ladies would have gotten my sympathy. Of course, they were young, and they enter into a melting pot of confusion, really. It's been said that they went to fight with ISIS, but who's ISIS fighting against? Is it the government, the regime there, or America, England, Canada, or what? But of course, they were ignorant, you know, probably not knowing the consequence of their indulgence. But Webo, I think they've been punished already in a big way. And for her to ask to basically expose ISIS is even more risky than anything else. I mean, she would be under surveillance. She would be, you know, probably a target for the rest of her life. And on both sides, of course, you would have to monitor her in a serious way, because as Mr. Hobson says, she might have been, you know, transformed into that type of person. That would be a danger to society. So yes, you got to keep her under surveillance. She probably would have to do a little time as well. Not in any, you know, maximum or even any way that really physically points towards punishment, really. But you know, you would really have to keep an eye on her for a while. So there is consequences when one decides to make these moves. It doesn't matter how young you are and how ignorant you are to the present situation. But I suppose, I mean, at the age of 15 years old, around that age, youths are sometimes led astray. Sometimes it's not those who we consider not intelligent, but the very intelligent ones sometimes likes to experiment and get involved in things that would, you know, stimulate their interests, I suppose. But I know the situation there in Syria is a melting pot of confusion, and an individual leaving and is perceived to be an ISIS fighter or going to fight for ISIS, could be fighting for anybody in the melting pot, it looks like, at the end of the day, because you know, the situation is obfuscated there, Webo. But I think in a general sense, they would get my sympathy.
But let me ask you this, Naya. If a person is 15, they're making that sort of decision, and they don't know what they're doing because they're 15, and so you can always sympathize with them. However, at 15, they nevertheless wanted their freedom or their rights to be able to go. fine. Well, on the flip side of that, can one argue at 15, then the parent or the government ought to have had the authority to deny them of that freedom or right to go. On the same basis that you're going to make the argument on the flip side of having gotten into it, you now get some sympathy on the basis that you were only 15.
Yes, well, at the age of 15, where most of us are still under our parents' authority. Back in my days, we would have been, certainly. Today's child, today's youth, different, Webbo. They've been protected by all kind of rights.
But that's exactly the point that I'm making. So if you're protected by these rights and they allow you to go, then the argument, could it not be made, then you must pay the penalty.
Yes, yes.
On the other hand, then, if you want to be like when you were 15, when your parents or the government stop you, then it's different.
Yes, yes.
Edric.
I agree with you.
Look, it is quite a fascinating story.
No, I think you weighed in on it before, so let me go to Pat,
Yes.
and then I'll come back to you.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes, Bebo, like you said, it's an interesting story. On the one hand, I do agree with Naya that some sympathy, or empathy you need to be extended to this child, because indeed it was a child who left, and you have a lot of children who are, impressionable, and I'm not blaming the parents, for not being protective enough. So the child, got to that stage where he would have been exposed. But that is just the danger of today's world. Kids are being exposed to a lot of things because parents are generally just not there enough to be able to guide them. It must have taken some amount of, quoting this young girl to get her to leave, the comfort of her home, to go to a place like Syria, because it's not a place that a child would ordinarily want to go. So she must have been in contact with someone who was coaching her for a while, to make that move. And of course, she was quite vulnerable. And however, having said that, she ought to be punished. It's true she's proposing something. I don't know how brilliant that is. Who is going to fall for it? Women are smart, yes. But I don't know who would even fall for that. I would imagine that she would, if we were going to take her back, because she is a UK citizen. I don't know if it is fair for her to be burdening some other, government. That is where she originated. Just like how when people do things in America that are not so good, they take them and they ship them back here. You need to take back your own, it seems. That is what is going on globally. So why is the UK not taking back their own? I think Trump is even threatening to, let loose, some Syrian fighters that they have there because you plan to let them loose if nobody's going to take them, because no one wants that kind of thing. But the child wants to go back home. He's still a child. I think, they ought to consider, seriously the fact that when she left, she was not, in a position to make, legal decisions, And of course, where is ISIS? What is home for her now? There's no ISIS home anymore. And so I think she might have to just be subjected to some degree of some debriefing and be subjected to some psychological evaluation or analysis or whatever, and see how best they can get her to assimilate back into society there. She probably would have to be under surveillance or whatever they decide to meet out. But I don't think it is fair to just leave her hang out there.
Edric.
She is no longer a child. And when you look at the age attained, 18 is the barometer. It's the yardstick where they're cut loose into society as young adults. And therefore, I make no apologies for her, and I offer no sympathy for her for having made such a miscalculation with reference to the decision to go and fight for a country against her own country. She was in school as a student. She would have read. She would have known the history of Britain. She would have known the history of the Middle East, Syria, and not probably, and ISIS, living conditions, the quality of life or the lack thereof, and the whole 9 yards. And thus, she would have had a lot of information on which to make a decision. And she made her decision to go. So once you have made that decision to go, and you now have fallen into that cesspool of disorganization, indiscipline, and I'm certain she may have been raped many times simply because of how these people are and where you are. You have no real rights, and consequently, you have become just a number in the general scheme of things. Therefore, she should not be taken back by Britain, and I hope they go in Parliament and pass a law.
As a citizen.
Pass a law that once you have gone down this treacherous road of being a fighter for ISIS or a member of ISIS, understanding what ISIS stands for in terms of the caliphate, they're trying to create a new paradigm with regard to a country unto itself, not necessarily owning territory or territorial as part of their mandate, but rather global as their territory. Wherever they are, that is part of the caliphate. And the objective is you're coming, you will help us to conquer territory, more and more. And ultimately, the East is said to be wiser than the West. And the East ultimately will conquer the West. And if Britain and Britons and parliamentarians are fully aware of all these dynamics, they should have gone or make preparations to go into Parliament to pass laws that would ensure that people like these do not return to the British society and be given all the rights of British citizens who have persevered, complied, and ultimately became patriot of Britain and the Western allies.
Edric, you ever studied the different types of rules? The different, when I said rule, I mean the different type of governance.
Well,
like
yes. Autocracy,
yes,
democracy.
yes.
You've got dictatorship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just curious, just being curious, out of curiosity. If you had your own country or world, having studied the various types, which one would you use?
Let me tell you, we had the greatest teacher on earth.
Let me take this and we get back. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Yeah, good night, guys. That young lady you guys talking about, she wants to get back into England for one reason. She was trained by ISIS for 4 years. She wants to get back there to perform some sort of, like a suicide bombing or something. That's the only reason she wants to get back in. They shouldn't let her back in. Think about that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
But I think we have more concern because there are a number of Trinidadians out there who are thinking of coming back home. And if I don't, we have concern because we have freedom of movement within our CARICOM area. And so we have to be concerned about that kind of policy as to what to happen to these people. And that is why the countries of the world are reluctant to take these people back. But citizenship gives a lot of right and so forth. And I don't know how you're going to tell a young lady who was born in Britain, she's a British subject, what are you going to banish her to what? You have to belong to somewhere. You're not an animal. You can't be thrown out there. You can't be thrown out there like it's a piece of cloth.
Yeah, but one option, Ted, wouldn't it be to what I referred to earlier? I asked a question then. Should the government then or somebody exercise more control then? Because if you give people the absolute freedom in the society, and then they do make choices that affects the society greatly in that adversely in that very adverse manner, should you not then have adverse measures for those that sort of those acts?
You must.
Yeah, I mean, that argument is very attractive because, to tell the truth, when I look at the situation, the British people, the British system, has ways of means of protecting itself. We haven't got that kind of control over our people. We can't even stop these killings around here. Never mind people who are disguised and become suicide bombers and all
Okay,
that.
Ted, let me just get this. I'll come back to you. Good evening. Thank you for holding. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Good evening.
You're on the air. Could you go ahead?
Good evening.
Yes, I would like to second that person who just called about her ulterior motives. I don't think they should allow her back. She have ulterior motives. Have a good evening.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Good night to you and your panelists.
Yes,
and
could
the
you?
only lady there, special good night to her.
Good night.
I want to agree with the first caller, but that's the same thing I'm here thinking. Maybe that lady want to get back home to do some damage. And on the other hand, do ISIS let the people go so freely?
Well, they have no control at the moment. They scatter themselves. They don't have any control over them. I mean, this girl is in captivity at the moment. She's not under the control right now of ISIS. She's under control of the Americans and the Kurds. And so she is in a camp.
And therefore, Ted, as one caller suggested, and therefore, having been trained for 4 years, she knows exactly what to say.
But that is, no, not necessarily.
Not necessarily, but it's a possibility.
It's a possibility.
That's why.
But you can't speak to the state of mind of the lady.
Yeah, but that is why.
She might be broken.
That's
she
why
might really want to go home.
I keep saying that I am not as much concerned about the situation with this girl. I'm concerned about those Trinidadians who are out there and who are now thinking of coming back home. These are
You got it closer to the Caribbean?
Yeah.
In the Caribbean?
Yeah, because these people, if they come back as citizens of Trinidad,
Muslims,
well, whatever they are, they will have a right to travel. And that is where the problem comes in for our society. I mean, Britain will have to take care of itself, but we don't have the control, we don't have the facilities to monitor these people. No, and that is the real concern.
But you're assuming that people are not going to put in their laws, or there's something in the law. I don't know because I'm not a lawyer. But there might be something in the law that if these people go out and fight in a foreign force, that when they come home, they might be in prison or whatever. Those that they're in Guantanamo Bay, I mean, these are people who were fighting overseas, and they captured them and had them there, and everybody was exposed to, well, not everybody, but some people got the benefit of trials, you know, so they might be subjected to that. I don't know. Maybe somebody who knows more about, international warfare might be able to weigh in.
Okay, well, that's my opinion. I hope Stanley accept my opinion because he said, it's not all opinion, it's an opinion.
Okay, but that's a light moment. Stanley, do you accept his opinion?
No comment, Webo.
Okay.
Well, this is one of those cases.
no comment.
No comment. Okay. Let me. But I think I interrupted. Yeah, I think I interrupted Ted.
Yeah, I said I am concerned about the because I've read a lot about the situation, not only in Britain but the Trinidadians that I'm really concerned about because there is very little legal precedent for the courts to go on because This has never happened before. And the question is whether, as Mr. Stanley said, that the parliaments should become, all over the region, should become cognizance of what could happen and start not be reactive, but proactive, and start thinking about what the possibilities are. That you could take away people's citizenship if they cross a particular line, and prevent them from coming back.
And make them stateless?
Well, yeah, but
I don't know.
it's not
stateless.
I mean,
I don't understand that one.
Well,
Man is a master of systems.
countries have done that. In fact, we have a system where we have we give the citizens by investment passports and citizenship, and we could take it back from them.
But that's different, though, because
We
that person
hopefully
enjoys
they have
dual
something
citizenship. Well, most of them have dual citizenship.
Yeah.
Man is a master of systems, Webo. And before we went down the road of creating constitutions by which people are governed, people used to be, whether they're going to follow certain principles, natural principles, or they're going to just do what they want. Because there are people who left from one region to the other before laws were enacted. It is believed that those people in Peru were there before anybody else. And they came across the Bering Strait, as the case might be.
But to the question that I asked before the interruption, though, in reference to, were you lord and master of a country or a society, and having studied the various types of governance, right, which would you likely to use? Because you're lord and master, and then so you're in the position to choose which one to govern your country or your world.
The greatest governance that existed in this world, exhibited by Jesus Christ.
You're not going to tell me you're Jesus
No,
Christ.
but at the same time we could follow those principles. Well,
Theocracy.
But
That would be a theocracy.
Mr. Stanley,
by just
if you had told me,
fear.
if you had told me, you're arguing as if it's the Old Testament, an eye for an eye. But when Christ came, and you're talking about Christ, Christ preached forgiveness. You know, and that is the system that we have inherited as Christians in the Western Hemisphere, and that's why we're able to forgive people and not condemn them for good, as in the Old Testament. So which one you
But with the forgiveness that you give, you expect that person, having received
But
that forgiveness,
I'm going to
Having
narrow you
received
down to answer
that
Ted's
forgiveness.
question, Mr. Stanley. Which one?
I already said, if I am following you clearly, that the greatest governor on earth was Jesus Christ. And if you operate on the premise of forgiveness, you expect that person who has been forgiven to also forgive.
Okay, let me take this. And
And
I'll give you
therefore
more
you have-
time to think about it while I take this caller. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Good evening, Weber. Here listening to Zon Radio. I'm watching BBC News here in Atlanta, and they did revoke her citizenship, and they're thinking of having her go to the country where her mom is from. That's what the news was saying on BBC.
Mm-hmm. And what? So what? Do you have a view on it?
My view is she's from London, England. I think she should remain a citizen and maybe you watch, as Dr. Bartlett was saying, and we monitor it. But as the lawyer was saying there, if she's a human being, you can't just throw her out as if she doesn't belong anywhere. Yes, she did the wrong, and they must give some penalty, consequences. But I don't think they should have just said, "Hey, she's no longer a British citizen, and now she's going to become a citizen of where her mother is from." That's kind of crazy.
Okay. All right. Thanks much.
That's why I was saying man is a master of systems.
So in essence, you'll create your own system?
You create a world for them.
No.
Yes.
The question, let's go over it again. The question I ask you pointedly, as you like to use that word, pointedly, were you Lord and Master of a world? And having studied the different types of systems, including, and I noticed that if we go back to the tape, when you came to dictatorship, you were very forceful with that. It might not have been of any significance. So I'm asking you, were you Lord and Master of a world or country, whatever it is? Which system would you have a preference for? Which one would you use?
There is a negative connotation to dictatorship. But if you were to analyze the word dictatorship,
so you would not use that?
The right thing. The right thing. You dictate to people the right thing.
So you would use dictatorship?
Right. I am not saying use dictatorship, but...
Well, I'm asking you which one would you use?
To teach. And I gave you an example already.
So you would not use dictatorship?
I would follow the dictates of Christ.
So you would like to be at the Vatican City. Vatican City. No, it's a country. You can take over Vatican City.
The Vatican is you've got Bank Ambrosiano. You can go back to all kinds of nefarious things. So
Ted, imagine Stanley was a lawyer, and you're the magistrate. Now, could you sum up for me the point that he just made?
Who made?
Edric, because I just asked him.
I'm not quite sure what the point. What the point is making.
You're not sure.
I must be honest.
Whoever expects me.
Because at one stage he raised the supremacy of Christ and so forth, and in another hand he's talking now about
principles.
And he's talking about dictatorship, that he has a certain attraction for dictatorship, to dictate how you should behave, you know. So I'm not quite sure. I mean,
well, I don't feel that bad because you disconnected me. So here we go again. Were you Lord and Master of a society, a world, a country, having studied the various types of systems, which you said you did, correct?
Quite true.
Okay. Which one would you employ?
Well, let us take the Lord's Prayer and follow those examples, and you can't go wrong.
So in essence, then, you will formulate your own system, which has its basis on the Lord's Prayer.
If you would like to put it that way.
Okay. And would it be fair then, or apt to call it Stanleyism?
Don't personalize it.
No, but I did, because I said, were you Lord and Master of your world, of a world?
Well, I'm saying to you, and it is simple, and you understood it. So don't get disconnected or bent out of shape simply because you're expecting me to accept a label.
Let me get a break.
I will not be defined.
Let me get a break. This is Thought That Get Results with Dr. Patricia Bartlett, Ted Hobson, Edric W. Stanley, and Conrad Naya Liebert. Your phone calls on 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. We'll be back after these.
Just arriving at Builders Paradise. Brand new mirror bypass doors. Sizes include 4 feet, 5 feet, and 6 feet. Oh, and don't forget to check out their Saturday yard sale for even better discounts. Builders Paradise, where your island dreams begin.
When VON vibrates, the whole Caribbean must shake.
860 AM, the Powerhouse.
back on this episode of Thought That Get Results with Conrad Nye Liburd, Edric W. Stanley, Ted Hobson, and Dr. Patricia Bartlett. Your phone calls on 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. Now, unless anybody else has anything else they'd like to add in that topic, I'd like to go on to something else. Okay, now the other thing that I wanted to take note of, Ted had mentioned there was an interesting discussion last night at the St. Paul's Anglican Church. And one of the things that I took from that, let me see whether or not these folks want to weigh in on the last topic first before we move on. Good evening, thank you for holding.
Good night, Weber. I would like to say,
good evening, thank you for holding.
Good evening. This question to Ted. So if somebody could commit a crime or do something wrong and they shouldn't be punished, but you should forgive them?
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
So what you were saying?
I spoke about the fact that these three young ladies left when they were 15. And I said Western societies have given some preference and some dividends to people who are underage and lack the responsibility, legal responsibility that we apply to adults. But I indicated that some form of punishment should be meted out because there must be consequences to acts that are antisocial, anti-government, whatever it is. So I didn't say that they must not punish. You have to be punished. You have to be there must be consequences no matter how young you are, even if you're 7 years of age.
Because the sitting machine of society right now, children tend to do big people act, and then people say, oh, they are a child, so you shouldn't punish them.
Well, when I was...
And if we continue in this kind of system and society, how we go? You realize what going to happen to this wall and the whole of the Caribbean?
The real problem is that we don't chastise our children when they're young. When I was 7 and 8 and 9 and maybe even younger, my parents used to chastise me severely, and that is why I was able to keep on the straight and narrow. And my mother was over 6 foot tall, and I mean, when she started with you, he beat you down.
But you see, Ted, what happened now, what I realize, the children then become the parent and the parent become the child.
Well, that's unfortunate.
The unfortunate is reality and it's happening all along, and that's why the society going anywhere we're going right now.
Well, I have to
the parents are free to speak to the children.
I agree.
So they're looking friends.
I agree as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Coming off that same point that the caller was making then, and somebody used the term being proactive earlier.
I did.
Okay, so then coming off that same point then, should we be proactive, realizing now that things are not as they used to be before? So should the government or the authorities be proactive and then start put certain regulations or controls in place to avoid a lot of these things being happening, and to avert having now to be pardoning and after this thing? Should that be done? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but that's what I say. I think we need to start having what I call vision. There is a lack of vision, really, generally.
And courage, maybe?
And courage, yes. But, vision, you must see down the road and anticipate what is the evidence shows that will come to the fore at some stage in the near future. And
but
you
Ted,
have to work and on that and start passing legislation and regulation to stop that, rather than waiting until the thing happened. And then, with the crime, and for instance, the 6 murders that place, all of a sudden the government is putting all these things in place. Well, I mean, some people would ask why weren't they there before?
But Ted, isn't that supposed to be a consequence or a result of the great education that we have? To have the vision and the foresight.
That's right.
To be able to be proactive and thus, yes, and have a better society.
Yeah.
So
I think the government try, but we still have a way to go in trying to analyze and in other societies you have psychologists and so forth to help the system on, but we don't have that here. And politics, because of the fierceness of politics, you can't try anything here. It's something that you have to wait until something stare you in the face to act on, which is unfortunate.
It's unfortunate, well, yes, because I always think that whereas we always sit around and talk about what's going on in America and elsewhere as it relates to terrorism, I always thought that the Caribbean is quite exposed to that because, I mean, we are American neighbors and there's so much American interest around us here in the Caribbean, so much schools, so much, hospitals and all type hotels, American interest around here. So I always wonder why we always think this idea of terrorism is by the way, it's outside of our zone. But I think now we are realizing how much it's in our backyard.
That's why I always try to, when those events happen, try to encourage us to do the connect in a local sense and to see how it can or will affect us.
Yes, because with our level of technology and what we have in place, we are totally exposed here, really. There's no training in that area. And, of course, in terms of responding to these things, I mean, we're a million miles away, and that's what we're talking about, forecast, vision. And yes, so we are asking the governments of the Caribbean to look a little more serious into that. We cannot be flat-footed here about terrorism. All of our interests and of course our interest in foreign investors.
And not just terrorism, but we are grappling with how many now? Maybe seven homicides in 6 weeks. Yeah. Okay. Good evening. Let me take this. Good evening. Thank you for holding. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Good afternoon. I'd like to say good night to man.
Good evening. Thank you for holding. Good evening. You're on the air. Oh. Okay. Please call, man. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Good evening, sir.
Yes. Could you go ahead?
What are we doing?
I'm well.
Good night to you and your panelists.
Yes.
Good night.
Yeah, gentlemen, I'm listening, right? But based on the little experience I have, before you can charge someone and prosecute them, there must be a law in place that you have to refer to. Am I wrong? And you have to show that that person break that law, right?
Yes. In America, to supporting terrorist organization. I think they all have that.
I don't know. I know of any law. Well, maybe I don't know, but I don't know that they have in place legislation in regard to that.
Yeah, they have.
They do. Well, if they do well, but they may have a broad legislation, but I don't know if they have something specifically speaking to this case. Because if they did, I don't see why you would be back and forth, then you will just deal with the law. Because one thing I know, speculation is what it is. Speculation is just speculation. You can't just take somebody and charge them and prosecute them. You have to have a certain legislation that they can intervene.
Well, I can assure you they have. Both in Britain.
Okay. Well, if they do well, then, But I was just thinking that, because sometimes we just talk without, Okay. Anyway, then.
All right.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
We must, in the Caribbean, put things in place because it is coming. It's already here. And those people who left Trinidad, who are part of the Muslim religion, and think that they owe great allegiance to Muhammad or the Quran, Holy Quran, or whatever that may be, more so than they owe it to Trinidad and the region.
But let me ask this. If we go ahead then and put things in place, laws, etc., as Ted also suggested, correct, Ted?
Yes.
the question I'll ask you and also ask Ted, will we have the courage then to implement it when it becomes necessary?
Sure.
Ted, we will have the courage?
I hope so, Webo. I'm not sure.
You're not as sure as
there
Edward.
There was a penal colony. I don't remember where it was established. But people who suffered from leprosy at a certain point in time.
But we're not talking, we are talking in our own case, knowing who we are as a people. That's why I asked the question specifically. Would we have the courage to implement it?
Sure.
Yes.
Because right now we have 7. That's the number that's being bandied around. And it is believed that the forces had been sent back. And as the forces have been sent back, so I was told, they started up again with great fury and rapidity. So the forces are back with the hope that it would stem the tide of the rapidity in terms of gun violence. So it was an experiment tried. It seemed to have borne fruits. And as it was believed that these people would take heed, control themselves, become law-abiding, the authorities decided, let us send the forces back. Forces went back, and all of a sudden, so I heard, they started again.
But you don't know if...
Not 100% certain. But I heard the Prime Minister last night stating that they are back in place and they would try and sustain them here with the hope that we would be able to reverse the rapidity of gun crimes. It's an experiment.
You have any doubt that the leaders are expressing very confidently that they will deal with whomsoever, and so on and so forth? There's the Prime Minister has said it, the Premier has said it, etc. All the leaders have. You think when the time comes, all those, that will be put into action? Because keep in mind, at the end of the day, it is not the Prime Minister or the Premier who has to carry out whatever is put in place.
We are governed by emotions, Webo, and in that regard, when a human being, by name, person, everything, is placed on or before you, for you to make a decision, depending on the circumstances, you might just decide to cave in. I was told yesterday that a robbery of a business place was in the making, and the security guard that was in place had the opportunity to put that perpetrator down. But he changed his mind because of maybe family reasons. He told me, based on what he envisioned, the person was a child, maybe under 18, 17, 16, as the case might be. And as a result, he never engaged to put down that perpetrator.
But
in my view.
But yeah.
He should have, I'm not saying to kill him, but making the attempt to rob that business place, and he had the employment to secure the place as a security guard with a licensed firearm, he should have in fact put that perpetrator down.
But maybe, is it possible, his training dictated that he ought not to have done that, take that action, unless it was absolutely necessary, last resort?
I hear you loud and clear. But the perpetrator got away and he doesn't know whom it is.
But that is why earlier I asked you. That is why earlier I asked you, were you Lord and Master of your own world? What system will you put in of governance will you put in place?
I told you already, we follow the dictates of the Lord's Prayer.
The Lord's Prayer, okay.
But it didn't mean that the people weren't nefarious in those days.
Okay. Dr. Bartlett? You wanted, Naya, anybody else wanted to weigh in?
No.
Okay. Now, maybe then we can go on, as I said. The meeting last night with the Prime Minister and a section of his cabinet, and they discussed a number of issues. One of the things that I find is very important, and it's going to basically test the Constitution as well. The decision with reference to former Prime Minister Dr. Douglas and the alleged 2 passports that he holds, the Dominican passport and the St. Kitts Nevis passport. That decision comes down tomorrow, the High Court in Basti at 1 o'clock. That's the scheduled time.
Is Wednesday or Thursday?
Wednesday.
Wednesday, okay.
Yes, tomorrow. Now, Ted, let's go to you because you have the legal experience, and so the couple of things I want to ask you on that.
Mm-hmm.
A, he wins the case, Dr. Douglas, right?
Yeah.
B, he loses. C, he loses but appeals. And D, at the end of it all, what does it mean for our Constitution? Because it is very important, regardless to what happens, in my view, in A, B, and C. The Constitution will be tested, won't it be?
Yeah. But of course, as I said, as everyone knows, it's unprecedented. It's never happened before. The question is whether the court decides that he is ineligible to sit as a member of Parliament. If it comes down in his favor, well, the government could appeal. That is Dr. Douglas's favor. The government could appeal. If it comes down in favor of the government, I'm sure Dr. Douglas would appeal. The problem is whether the court will allow Dr. Douglas the stay of the order so that the decision for him whether to be removed from Parliament.
Okay, let's do it step by step for the benefit of the listening public. So let's deal with A first. What happened? What if tomorrow, when the judgment is read, the judge says that Dr. Douglas, the case is dismissed?
Well, of course, if the case is dismissed.
So that's it. And let's say the government doesn't appeal.
Well, that's it.
So we go back to the status quo.
Yeah, we go to the status quo.
B. What if he loses? That is, for instance, the court says, well, according to the dictates of the Constitution, you violated it, and the law. You had 2 passports, and therefore you should not have been able to attend. So you cannot serve in Parliament, right? That means what?
That means that he will no longer be able to attend Parliament, and he will be no longer the representative for his constituency.
Okay, that's if he loses outright.
Yeah.
Okay. But what if he loses and appeals?
Well, that is the point.
That's right.
As I expect he would.
Yes.
What would happen there is that the court will determine whether there will be a stay of the decision, meaning he can still remain a member of Parliament until the Court of Appeal decides the matter.
Okay.
I think that would be fiercely contested, but the court will decide whether they will stay the execution of the order.
Okay, so if it stays the execution of the order, it means then it stays it until the appeal is heard.
That's right.
So which would suggest that, because pundits are suggesting that if Dr. Douglas loses, he will obviously appeal.
Yeah.
But then the question comes into play about the stay.
The stay.
Because from a tactical standpoint, and I go to my political expert, they're suggesting, Mr. Stanley, my political expert, they're suggesting that the Prime Minister may well call the election if Dr. Douglas is not able to run and is no longer the leader going into the election of the party. Perhaps it might suggest that the opposition is a little disarray and it's a good time to call a quick election. Edric.
Obviously.
Tactically?
Tactically, it would be a brilliant move.
Okay, so are you expecting then that if Dr. Douglas loses and there is no stay, are you expecting a quick election?
Not necessarily.
No?
The government has breathing room, but there are other things.
But I'm talking about from a tactical
Yes.
standpoint, looking at the fact that if you have the opposition, any one party always is willing to go when they think the other party is not fully ready, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Now, if Ted, explain to us why or why not, if Dr. Douglas appeals, why or why not the judge wouldn't give a stay?
Well, the judge has to consider whether, in all the circumstances, you could deny the constituency of representation until such time as the Court of Appeal meets, and he has a number of considerations to take in mind. That happens not only to this matter, but any matter. You have a matter in the Court of Appeal, and the court decides, well, the person appeals, and the court decides, well, okay, all right, the judgment mustn't go into effect until the Court of Appeal meets. And
okay.
So they have considerations to do it. It's not automatic that this takes place, but they will consider all the circumstances. And one of the circumstances will be what would happen to the representation of that constituency during that period there, because it may take 6 months, 4 months, whatever it is.
Okay. Well, let us assume that there is a stay if he loses, right? Now, a stay until the appeal is heard?
Yes.
Okay. Now, is the court minded? How does the court work? Is it minded to give it urgent attention for the appeal?
Well,
or it will have to just follow the normal...
No, he will give it...
In a matter like this, I think there will be
Urgent.
some urgency applied,
Yeah.
and they will seek to... Because as I indicate to you, there is the question of representation of a constituency. It means that if Dr. Douglas loses, that potentially his constituency is without management, as it were.
Okay.
So the court has to consider all that. So in order, if they're going to give a stay, they're going to sort of deal with it as a matter of emergency.
Okay,
and
so
deal with it quickly.
So is it fair then to say that in that case, hypothetically, it is almost similar to the 2014?
Yeah.
And so then I ask, do you expect then that it is going to be something rough because it is going to be seismic in terms of the Constitution being tested?
Yes, yes.
And do you expect it then to reach to the Privy Council?
Well, it could. It could. I mean, this is a substantial matter. And, you know, you are denying the representative of the people from functioning. So I would think that it will reach all the way to the Privy Council. And in that time, what you are having is, in that time, the constituency may be without representation. And not only that, but I would expect that the governing party would get a lot of, you know, political benefits from having Dr. Douglas out there scampering all over the place trying to maintain his situation.
Okay, in preparation for this section of the discussion tonight, I did a little practice, because I do that now and then, and a couple of my friends, right? Mm-hmm. And one of them asked me, well, could let's again hypothetically suggest that Dr. Douglas is not successful. Could he immediately resign, or the seat is vacated?
Yeah.
could he just not give up one of the passports?
Well, it got to be one.
And then,
it got to be the Dominica one.
Right. and then quickly run again, because he likely will win in the constituent. Let me just go to this. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Good night to Madeline Grant up there in America. Put your eyeball.
Okay, so Edric, Dr. Balti wanted to win. So the question that they ask, could the person, could he quickly resign? Or just...
I don't think he can do that. I can't remember exactly what the law spoke to, but I think that there was some penalty as it relates to the period of time that he could run again.
Right.
Or he would be bad for a period of time. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I think you're correct, Dr. Bartlett, because somebody pointed that out to me. And the irony they said was that law came into place under
him.
Under him. Yeah, he was very tough on that.
So
it's going to be
looks like
tomorrow.
Very interesting, very interesting tomorrow. Very seismic and very. So that is what I think. Again, our country, makes very significant history, because that one that went up to the Privy Council was seismic. And this one, because all of the islands have it in their constitution.
Nowadays,
but Ted, it has never been tested to that level, right?
No.
But what about right now, as it relates to Guyana, though? Remember the vote that they had there of no confidence. The chap who left and went to Canada, they're now bringing the case now to say that he really should not have been sitting, because he had dual citizenship. The same party that benefited from him.
And then it would be even.
So that's even more interesting.
Yeah, but what is it?
It's testing the same premise, I think.
Right, but the other thing that's interesting in that, though, is that you look at whether or not at the end of the day, you're either not just making a mockery or playing games. Because when I saw several news reports after that vote, and remember they had a timeline.
Yeah.
And I realized that all they were doing is just using different things, as Ted used the phrase, stays and so on and so forth. Because at the end of the day, the motion was carried, but the same government is still in office.
Yeah. And
so
now the supervisor of elections said they can't have any elections until July, because they have to do the voters list, and they have to put things together, have to train people and all that sort of thing.
So now, Ted,
in the end
so at the end of the day, Ted, is it not a dangerous precedent we are sending in that people, at the end of the day, over time, may start to do not give the necessary respect to laws and procedures? Do we stand the danger of that?
Yeah, we always do, unless there are sanctions and so forth.
Because remember that one of the reasons why Jamaica got so bad in terms of the legal aspect, where they said they basically had, what justice they call it? Vigilante justice. Because the citizenry at some point felt that the justice that they have on the books and so on and so forth was not meted out fairly. And so they end up in chaos. So that's why I'm asking, Ted, that if you have a motion of no confidence, it is carried, and then a year and 2 years later, you find that the government still remains in power by being able to use all sort of little gadgets and tricks and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
That's politics.
Well, you're dealing with politics.
Right.
That is politics.
But the danger.
And governments are not easily going to be pushed out.
But what's happening
but the danger,
now?
what happens to the,
what's happening in Jamaica now with two parliamentarians been tampered with, or one of them died?
Both of them.
Good evening, thank you for holding.
Lightly on the time.
Mr. Hobart. And good night to good friend Ted Upson there, and the rest of the panelists here. Now, my little contribution tonight, listening to you all very clearly. And know that you remember the Honorable Sean Richard and Mr. Lindsey Grant? They had passports from different countries. But American passport. They were showing allegiance to American passport. And they get barred from running into the election. Right? If they never cleared it, they never clear it. If they never clear it, they never announce the citizenship. Now, Dr. Douglas now have a Dominican passport. You understand? Over to you. Hello? Hello?
Yes, you're on the air. Could you go ahead?
Yes. No, Dr. Douglas now have a Dominican passport with a Sinti passport. I want to know that if the Attorney General could not abide from Parliament, because I believe the Constitution clear that you shouldn't have a different passport, no other country passport, to your country passport as a candidate, as a representative in Parliament. You understand? So, it seems to me that, like, spending all this money in court, going round and round thinking about, I believe the Attorney General could have done the job. Buying something until whenever, sack him, and if he announced the citizenship, just like how Sean Richard and Mr. Grant do, that he could have come back and run politics if he wanted to run. But now he announced it and he still got the passport. I want to know that whether that to go through all these court case, everything putting up. Them thing is fair enough. All right then.
Okay, very. This
is
the exact
point. You have to have a court to decide whether laws have been broken, yes or no. You know.
Yeah, but
Attorney General can't decide that.
Right, but I think what I also get from what the caller was saying is the point that we were trying to make earlier before he called in. It's going to be very, very important what happens, because if you have all these laws in the Constitution and so on and so forth, and we refer to the motion of no confidence, right? And it said that it is carried, because keep in mind, people are not as silly as sometimes we think, right? By just putting big words to it and say, well, it got to be legal, and people know fairness, right? So if you have a motion of no confidence, it tells you what it is and whether you should carry and so on and so forth. And then
what the end result would be.
The end result. And then at the end of the day, 2 years later,
nothing
the same nothing happens.
Frustration.
And then and so on. That is what we're saying. Right? As the caller says, at the end of the day, you see these things keep happening, they're going to end up saying, well, it don't make no sense.
Yeah, Bebo, I think natural justice is a little different from the jurisprudence that is being practiced.
You have to have trial.
You're right. There's a due process. You have to go through it, and it's just one of those things. I don't particularly care for it either, but that's just the way it is.
Right, but
justice grinds slowly, very slowly. Takes a lot of time.
Yeah, but they also have a saying that says, to justice denied, something like when it's slow. Justice delayed is justice denied. You agree with that?
Sure, and does build up frustration, and people take the law in their own hands.
Good evening, thank you for holding.
Yeah, Mr. Albert, good night again.
Yes.
I've been asking a question all night, right? And apparently, nobody seems to want to answer it. And the question is, you're saying that it's okay to put laws and mechanism in place, but when the time comes to enforce these laws and mechanisms, whether those in authority will have the courage to do it.
Yes.
Well, I'm asking you a question now. Why is it that you have asked that question so many times tonight?
Because I don't seem to be getting the answer.
All right.
So I keep asking.
Yeah. That might be one of it. It might also be that you have noticed quite the opposite for some time too. That it is quite true that lots of times, we're talking about the case even with Dr. Douglas, where he put laws in place regarding this same matter. And when it was convenient for him, he had the courage to uphold those laws. But now that issue is on the other foot, it's something else. Well, I ask you the question, but I'm going to say what is my observation. And my observation is that you really cannot trust, especially who we call politicians, in that they do what is convenient for them at that time. And I believe this is one of the reasons why you keep asking the question over and over, because I believe that is, you also notice this, that when it's convenient, that's what it is. When it's not convenient, it's something else. I know the word justice to mean that you reward good and you punish evil. However, we are dealing with human beings, and every one of us have our own likes and dislikes and our own prejudice and our own friends. And what I have noted over the years is that is exactly how the leaders behave. If it is my friend at this point, then I'll turn a blind eye. Good night.
Good night. Well, the caller has hung up, but one of the other reasons why I kept asking the question also is because I'm practicing on who I can get to practice, because if people who I want to ask, they won't let me ask them.
But what is so interesting, though, the laws, as we speak about it, in other jurisdictions, people, for the most part, don't behave like that. For some reason, when it comes to politicians in the Caribbean and Africa, there's something about us, as it relates to what is, we have an issue with that. And we're not representing people, in the true sense of the word, and we would never step down. We do things that compromise the integrity of the offices, and we don't step down.
Well, how about step them down then, Dr. Bartlett?
I'm sorry?
Since they don't step down, what about step them down?
Well, you have to wait.
Of course you have to wait, and not only that,
step them down.
Step them down? Good evening, thank you for holding.
Good evening, brother. How are you doing?
All right.
I want to ask you this question. This is plaguing my mind all the time. If your panelists, esteemed as they are, could help me. What is the status of the Hurricane Relief Fund that came to St. Kitts and Nevis by the sale of what I'm calling finished by investment? I am told, and I stand corrected, because I don't think I know all things. I don't think I know anything. That they sold 1,200 passports under the Hurricane Relief Fund, this one-off one, for $150,000 US each. That fund is a one-off fund. By my calculation, it comes to $180 million US. If you multiply that by 2.7, you get what a whopping $486 million was received by the federal government for the Hurricane Relief Fund. Now, the Hurricane Relief Fund, I'm told, during the two hurricanes, what's the other one name? I forget the name. Maria. Those two funds, those two hurricanes, they have what we call a damage assessment. In Nevis, the damage assessment was $55.2 million. In St. Kitts, their damage assessment was $41.4 million. My position is this, that those funds have been received. They tell me the total funds came in at the end of September of 2018, $486 million. Don't you think that Nevis should get a cut? I mean, I don't want no share. I want a cut, because I want to use, for that type of money, I want to use one of those big, what they call them, they do act and cut it and that money should be put to Nevis, to the Nevis Island government. I am not so sure. I heard the Premier, Mr. Bradley, say he has been discussing it now for a year. If you take a year to discuss money that is yours, how much you going to take to discuss what money is not yours?
You don't discuss it at all if it's not yours.
Well,
how about that?
If I try to get money from you that you have and it's not mine, you will want to know that I might take a little more time. But if you have money for me, you get this hurricane relief. It is not the idea for there, and that is also to be shared. But I'm going to come to that because the truth is the hurricane relief. I find we should get at least 200 million one time, and I don't want it in hawks and herrings, and I don't want it in jibs and jabs, and I don't want anybody to give me any money every month. So, as you know, you know me, I know you. If you have some money for me, you give me my money, let me spend it. The fact that the federal government has those funds, and I think I don't even have the dribbling it because I think the poverty assessment project in Nevis is cured because it cannot be poverty in Nevis and poverty in St. Kitts ain't the same poverty as you and we all can attest to. So I want to get those funds, and the Nevis Island administration should have been. And I heard Mr. Branson say he wants those funds, but I don't know when those funds are going to come. And I'm asking you and your committee if you could help the big boys here could ask for that little money here because I never met the man who doesn't want money. Never met him, no matter how much money he has. So I think that the Nevis administration should get those funds. I believe that there is some sort of unwillingness to give Nevis administration Nevis money because somehow we don't trust us, the people of Nevis. I suppose they don't trust us to look after our funds. And I don't want the federal government to be handing out any money in Nevis. So on behalf of the administration, I want the administration to hand it out. I am told that at the hospital and at the care and at the police station, if they're paying the contractors, I prefer if Nevis politicians pay the contractors, and that things are better. So I would ask, I want to get a formula together as how those funds, hurricane relief funds, are who be distributed, and distributed one time. And then I would like to have another formula in place as to how the Sustainable Development Fund and all these nice names as ideas and everything, how those are to be shared, because I do not like this embarrassment of every month somebody giving me some money and call it budgetary support. That's like a way you young girl a change. So I'm not taking that so long and everything. I don't like that because it's never gone up and it's never gone down. I don't know why it's based upon. And I think that it is putting Nevis out to be what we call mendicants and we're just holding out our hands and beggars. So I would like to say that I need the Nevis Island administration, and I'm sure the administration will be glad for me to speak on that behalf, on their behalf. Because I think that Nevis should be run by the Nevis Island administration, not by the federal government, as I see happening. All right.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. I think I would, that's interesting, I want to defer that.
Me too.
To the Premier, who comes here tomorrow night and is never shy, from my experience, to discuss anything concerning Nevis. And I almost said almost anything. He's a good debater, a good orator, and he speaks truth to power. So I'm going to publicly suggest that unless anybody like to make a comment on it, so I am going to suggest to the Premier to please to tackle it. And I'm seriously to tackle that one for us tomorrow.
Yeah, but it's unfortunate because the Prime Minister was over here last night. That would have been a good time to raise it. It's unfortunate that it didn't have a call in from, maybe the caller could have.
The same caller who knows all these facts.
Right, well,
but like you said, that's why tomorrow is a better night.
Right, but the point is, though, that it is what it is. It is the reality. And in spite of, we still try and see what little we can do. Because if you realize I made a comment earlier, it perhaps was diplomatic. But I said, I kept asking the questions of the panel because the people who really supposed to answer, they don't want us to ask them anything.
No, but we should still, though.
Yeah, well, we do ask, but they don't come around.
No, but ask anyway.
Well, last night they were there,
Yeah, should have
and
been
one of
there.
our panelists was there.
So anyway,
I understand he asked some good questions. So
we'll ask the Premier if he can, assist
with
us
it.
with that, because it is a very important area.
I'm sure he'll answer. I'm
Yeah.
sure,
Okay.
because I've heard him answer the same question before, and I'm sure he's going to attempt to answer it again
Yeah.
because I think he listens.
Okay. Now, at the risk of being repetitious, Edric, might I ask you the question again that I've been asking you all night? Because it's very important. I'd like to get an answer. Could I ask you again?
depends on what the question is, Mr. Stan.
He knows. Could I ask it again? You're not going to answer me.
Dead silence.
Dead silence. Okay. Pat, go ahead.
Well, what I thought was interesting, though, you were making these, well, you're asking the questions as tactically, what would happen, as it relates to, and I think it was pointing towards the next general election, but interestingly enough, apparently there was another poll taken, and so I think that the administration, as it is now, the Team Unity, government as it is now, has enough confidence, I would imagine, to be able to call the election at any time, whether, be it Douglas ready for it or not. Because apparently the Anderson poll is now saying, that they are popular. But what I find interesting, and I like polls, Webber, what I find interesting is that these popularity polls, we just had one last year. It was when everybody was up in a fury about what the chap from Barbados, would have returned the information, the results or the analysis of that one. And people had a lot to say about him. I don't know what is going to be said about Anderson this time around.
But Anderson is supposed to be the one for the Labour Party, I think.
Oh, really?
The last time, some time ago.
Okay. Well, notwithstanding, it still would be interesting.
I haven't heard about that one, the Anderson one.
Yeah, it was referenced last night. I think it was referenced last night by the Prime Minister, Olesaman, and we were saying how popular they are. But like I said, I like polls, but I think that I find interesting that people, politicians engage in popularity polls, but as it relates to policy polls, things when to hear from the people what they think about policies, I just don't find enough of that is being done, and I'm just hoping that in the next, but because I suspect that with the popularity that they're riding on now, I suspect that the Team Unity, deserving of some people think that not deserving, whatever you think, if they go into a next administration or the next one, I'm hoping that they would consider more polling as it relates to the policies that are being instituted in the country. I realize that reference was made of the Marijuana Commission as well, and apparently the work has been done, and so I think Naya would be pleased to hear that we're on the road, we're almost there. I don't know what it just says, but so I would imagine that the results from that would be forthcoming sometime soon as well.
Well, it's far too late. It's 2 years late already. But of course, we are anxiously waiting the results on that. I just hope, it would not be one that continues to deprive the people of the herb. Actually, I'm very surprised that the debate, that type of debate continues, because as you might have known, I was in Canada the other day, and the debate is not about legalizing marijuana. The debate is about accessing marijuana, because in Montreal, I think that's the only place, in Quebec is the only place that you can publicly go and buy marijuana from a government-run place. In the different parts of Canada, you have to order it online, and it would be delivered to your office. And the people are saying, well, if you don't have a credit card and a computer, it's difficult to order online and have things being delivered to you. They want more of these public places throughout the whole of Canada.
Naya, you think that this issue, is of such magnitude that it perhaps needs discussion on a lot of other areas and components of it? For instance, when the Four Seasons came into being, a lot of the maybe all of the benefits and the good things were highlighted from it and about it. Maybe a decade or so down the road, we ended up with certain social problems, including children not being properly, quote-unquote, brought up, monitored, etc., etc., and then we paid a social price. Yep. And then people began to say that we neglected to have seen that, and Mr. Hobson was speaking about vision earlier on, to have seen and dealt with it in terms of dealing with mitigating measures. Do we have the same issue, type of problems? Can we foresee the same types of problem with this issue? Because it seems to me as if it's just a matter of a debate. Oh, we need to think it got some good things in it, etc., etc. Let's free it up. And then
the Prime Minister, free up the hub.
Free up the hub. Right? But you're not hearing, maybe it is done, maybe it is done, maybe it's just that I'm not hearing it. You're not hearing the other side of the debate of some of the other things that can happen and some of the other things that need to be put in place. Right? We're here, for instance, a lot of money involved. Mm-hmm. And then you say, well, what you can do with all this money when you make it? But nobody is talking about, maybe, well, when I say nobody, so you understand what I mean. Yeah. I'm not hearing the flip side of it. Like the other night when you and I were talking and we referred to the lyrics of the song. They don't build any schools anymore. All they build is prison. So there are certain things that we forgot to deal with. And so instead of building schools, we're just building prisons to put the results of the social problems. So you think that we need to step back and... Let me take this first, Niall, and then I'll come back. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Yeah, gentlemen.
Yep. Yes.
I have a few thoughts about the legalization of the marijuana. I have not heard certain discussions on it yet. And I want to say something here. Let's just say the marijuana is legalized next year. Number one, it would be the government, I think, who is going to legalize it, right?
They have to be.
Okay, no, all right.
They have to pass legislation.
All right, so let me go ahead then. So the government is the one who would take the decision to legalize or not to legalize marijuana. Then the question must be asked, who will produce it? Who will market it? Who will control it and gain the big benefit from it? Let us take cigarette. Let us take alcohol. Because sometimes we forget that there was some time when these things were illegal as well. But, you know, those stuff were illegal some time ago. And then they were legalized. And from what I can see, is that it's the big corporations, the people with the monies, who really control the market now. And then they would pay taxes to the government, of course. And it seems to me like they're the ones who are gaining the big profit from these things. I have no problem with marijuana, none whatsoever. I am thinking all the time that it should have never been illegal. But I am more looking at decriminalizing marijuana more than legalizing it, because I feel like those who are pushing the legalization, they have their ulterior motive to take over the market and take it out of the small man's hand. If it is that the small man will reap a reasonable amount of benefit from it, then fine. But if it is that government and big corporations is going to control it, I don't see any use. So let us look at it from that standpoint, and maybe we can have some discussion on it. Good night.
Good night. Naya?
Yeah, well, I understand your concern, and I think, you know, that frame of mind would follow through on, you know, any circumstance where there's a change about to be made, and people considering a change. People want to really look at not just the immediate impact, but, you know, the long term, and of course that no doubt has been considered by the countries that saw it fit to legalize the herb. There's been a lot of discussion about this. I mean, England had decriminalized.
Yeah, but now, to be fair, though, I was referring to us.
To us.
Because the fact that those countries...
Yeah.
Sorry. The fact that those countries addressed those concerns, my question is, are we doing it as well?
Well, I'm not sure what we're doing. I believe what we're doing is speaking of ignorance, because I don't think, you know, yes, there was a commission, you know, but are we doing any laboratory experiments about this, really? We're dealing with something which is pretty new, and of course we got to put things in place to probably put it in the hands or expose it to those of some responsibility. No, we have all kind of medicines out there, and of course we know that. But these things are always, you know, earmarked. Keep out the reach of children. Canada has a particular situation there where they are trying to keep it out of the reach of those below 18. I mean, this is something they are doing with alcohol and all, and quite successful. So the question is whether or not we are to deprive the country of the benefit completely, or whether or not we are willing to give them the benefit of the doubt in terms of give them access to it and put certain things in place. Hopefully, what they are putting in place would eliminate any disadvantages or a lot of disadvantages that might come with the legalization of it. Because of course, I mean, you legalize herb, like if you legalize anything, it won't be absolutely smooth in its dealings, in its consummation, in what people is dealing with it. Because of course, you know, some people, like in Canada, and I always have to go back to Canada, the people are saying, well, look, legal marijuana is too expensive because you got to buy it plus tax. And the illegal one, where the guys continue to sell on the road, is less expensive. So circumstances like those will develop. And of course, you have to put things in place to counter that. Because really, the whole legalization process is run by government. And they want to take it under their wing and, of course, make as much money from it as possible. You know, they are buying from local producers and international producers, too, because I think Jamaica sent a shipment to Canada.
Of the oil.
Eh?
Of the oil.
Of the oil.
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 Okay, let me just take this. I'll come back to you. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Yes, good night. Hello?
You're on the air. Could you go ahead?
Something we are not looking into. Who engineered slavery? Who engineered the slave trade? Who benefited from slavery and the slave trade? The same big banks, the no owners of the big banks who are now having the majority decision in legalizing marijuana. You know, a lot of us, because the people in America saying they does not want to do no business with people who is involved with the legalization of marijuana in the Americas, and they want to put them now on the Caribbean. That is what the big problem in the legalization of marijuana presently now, you know. I heard it on the news. So then this is what we are not looking into. They now still want to control us mentally. They want to make major decisions in we know uprising ourselves out of state. You can't in the backbone got the tentacles. The octopus, they want to cut us kind of hole. Look into that. Good night.
Good night. Naya,
No, Rebo, I think, marijuana is being used in the Caribbean, long enough. Is one thing I don't expect if they legalize it. If they legalize it, they're going to be this massive increase in the usage of it. I don't think so at all. I mean, so I'm not sure if we are to expect any major difference in terms of social concern. Of course, there's going to be some kind of economic hype. People like Stanley would like to get involved in the trade, but in terms of
I didn't know that
of the social.
I
think sufficient marijuana is being.
I never heard you say that.
Over such a time, it's being used. It's nothing really to expect, which is going to be totally whack as far as I check. I mean, it's left to be seen. But again, if government's going to legalize it, this will have sufficient insight and forecast as to what policy they're going to put in place to really, make this thing the way they want to have it. But importantly, the people must not be deprived of the benefits of marijuana.
Yeah, but we don't know what the commission has said, though. We have not gotten the report. I mean, that's what,
I'm hoping that they don't continue with this deprivation and this locking up and beating up and really creating criminals out of normal and everyday circumstance.
Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Yeah, Mr. Hobart, I can't read a lot tonight.
Yeah, take a minute.
These other people don't call, I'll call. Based on my experience, it's not everything has to come down to the point where you say it's legal or illegal. I never know of any particular law in Nevis which say it's legal or illegal to have a mango tree in your yard. Some things are just a given. No, when you hear certain people start talking about certain things, you must always know that there's a reason why they're talking, And I am saying again, based on what I see and what I have read and what I have heard, is that marijuana should have never been considered as illegal. You see? And I press the point again that what should happen, as Naya is saying, because it is made illegal, people are getting locked up and charged and all kind of things, to me, wrongfully. And I press the point again and say, we need to go back to the point where it's not illegal, but not necessarily that you have something on the books talking about you legalizing it, when I know, maybe a lot of other people don't know. I could say a lot more things, but in the interest of time I won't, that the big movement behind the legalization is the big corporations who want to control it. And the governments doing their assessment and to see how much revenue they will gain from it. And it seemed to me in that case, most of it will be taken out of the ordinary man's hand, especially the wrestlers who use it for their religious rituals.
Okay, caller.
All right.
All right. This, as I listen, even this part of the discussion, I notice, again, I don't have a problem with the points that are made, whether or not they'll make a lot of money, etc., etc. I go back again to the example that we use with Four Seasons. It brings economic benefit, the island benefits. But the point is, it has some social problems which we can't seem to grapple with. And maybe I should bring another example. It's like giving somebody a bicycle, right? Giving a kid a bicycle, they have a lot of advantages with it. But you fail to address the fact that there's a possibility that they can fall. And if they do, you have something called a helmet. That if you put that in place, etc., it can, help to minimize the thing. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the bicycle has a lot of benefits. So,
that's what governments are for.
For what?
To put policies in place to make sure whatever.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, that when you have a debate, and that is why I'll tell you something. I see sometimes, a lot of times, we fail with a project because we fail to appreciate that there might be certain negatives or certain problems. So instead of also looking at the problems and trying to mitigate them, you say, man, leave them alone because there are a lot of things. If we succeed, a lot of things can happen. No, and that's all that I'm saying.
Yeah, I do
that
understand
when
what you're saying.
we hear the debate, and sometimes, you know, for instance, a person might hear me bring up these pointers, and they'll readily conclude that I'm against it. Maybe I am. No. Maybe I'm not. But as far as I know, that is how you have a good debate, a good, honest debate, and that is also a method by which you use, a procedure you use, if you want to be successful with certain things.
I suppose one could say that there are pros and cons. I am advancing the pros. We are those who are advancing the cons.
I got you.
In a convincing way.
I got you now. You're right.
Yeah, but mind you, maybe we have not really, you know, delved into that kind of discussion here on this show. But like when the commission was working, when it was doing its work, I think it went out and engaged people. And I did not myself participate in that process, but I think that the process was there for people to participate in. You know, people who had concerns one way or the other, you know, had the opportunity to go and voice those concerns. As to what the recommendations are, I think we're still, you know, waiting to, you know, for the release of that. But it's a good move that at least it has gotten as far as the commission reporting on its work back, you know, to the cabinet, and so I guess we'll of course, right.
Okay, let me take this. Good evening. Thank you for calling. Caller, you have a minute. You have a minute.
Marijuana, just to smoke it. I do not think them bring no good benefit and no good health to the people of the country. Now legalize marijuana in a medical purpose, in a medical way, to use. Because I have no problem with it. I have no problem with it. I use it for making those things. But just to legalize it for the rest of to smoke it safe, I believe that we're going to get a problem. Because somebody got to control it.
Okay, caller.
It's a plant, it's an ordinary plant.
Okay, caller, we're basically out of...
Somebody don't got to take control, the government don't got to look over it.
Yeah, we're caller, I gave you a minute. We're
legalize it just like that? For maybe somebody smoke, I do not believe so. And I believe if you legalize, I believe that with the ordinary man...
Caller, I gave you... Okay, we got to go. Now, just a little light moment, Edric, as we go. This place, St. Kitts and Nevis, is a very fascinating place because this caller calls in. He says, I just do it, drink tea and stuff like that and so on. In another jurisdiction, he'll just get 2 handcuffs on him. Anyway, who got the last word?
Well, to everyone, I bid you peace. Good night.
Mr. Stanley is very quiet tonight.
Very.
This program repeats tomorrow at 10 o'clock following the VON News Minute. Join the Honorable Mark Brantley tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock for On the Mark. Thank you all again for joining us. This is your voice in the community, thought that get results. You all have a wonderful evening.